There was a time when a single empire connected three continents, a realm of deserts, cities, and seas, where the call to prayer rose from Cairo, echoed across Damascus, and faded into the mountains of Anatolia. For 6 centuries, the Ottoman Empire ruled more than half of the known world, not only through the sword, but through administration, diplomacy, and belief. Yet in 1918, the maps bled. The empire, already weak and weary, collapsed in the final storms of the Great War. When the guns fell silent, its territories were carved like a feast between the victors, Britain, France, and later, the great powers that rose from their ruins. What remained was not an empire, but a vacuum, and in that vacuum, chaos would bloom. But what if that collapse never happened? What if the Ottomans had endured, reformed, adapted, and survived? What if the caliphate had not been abolished, but reborn? Would the modern Middle East, a region scarred by division, proxy wars, and despair, have known peace instead of conflict? It is a question that haunts historians, theologians, and dreamers alike. For behind the familiar story of collapse lies a quiet truth. The Ottoman Empire fell not because it was doomed, but because the world refused to let it evolve. In this alternate history, we imagine a different fate. A world where the empire learned to bend before it broke, where the crescent did not crumble, and where the word unity meant more than a slogan drawn on sand. History did not end. It simply turned a different page. The year is 1917. The Ottoman Empire is exhausted. Its armies, stretched thin across deserts and mountains, are bleeding men and morale. In the real timeline, this is the beginning of the end. Revolts erupt in Arabia. The British advance through Palestine, and Istanbul's ministers whisper of surrender. But in this alternate history, one decision changes everything. Grand Vizier Talat Pasha, a man often remembered for tragedy and stubborn pride, reads the signs earlier than his counterparts. Instead of clinging to Germany's fading fortunes, he moves to end the war while negotiation is still possible. Through secret channels in Switzerland, the Ottomans approach Britain with a desperate offer: peace without victory. In the spring of 1917, London accepts. The British Empire, already drained by the trenches of Europe, sees value in a stable Ottoman buffer between itself and the volatile Russian front. The treaty signed in neutral territory demands heavy concessions: withdrawal from the Arabian Peninsula, the recognition of British control over Egypt and the Suez Canal, and French economic privileges in Syria. But the Ottoman state survives. The Sultan remains in Istanbul, and the caliphate endures, reimagined as a constitutional symbol rather than a divine monarchy. The empire loses land but gains time, and time for a decaying empire is a more valuable resource than territory. Inside the empire, reformists within the Committee of Union and Progress seize the opportunity. They dissolve the wartime regime, promise local autonomy to Arab provinces, and begin drafting a new federal charter. The empire transforms, not through collapse, but through compromise. No Sykes-Picot borders are drawn in secret. No Western mandate divides the Levant. No arbitrary lines cut through tribes and faiths that had coexisted for centuries. Instead, a new structure begins to take shape. The Ottoman Federation of 1920, composed of semi-autonomous regions: Anatolia, Syria, Mesopotamia, and Palestine. Each sends representatives to a bicameral parliament in Istanbul. Turkish remains the administrative language, but Arabic, Kurdish, and Armenian are given equal legal recognition. For the first time in modern Islamic history, the caliph becomes not an autocrat but a constitutional figure, a moral voice rather than a ruler. It is an empire redefined, weakened, yes, but still whole. An empire that refuses to die, not through force, but through adaptation. And with that act of endurance, history itself changes direction. The survival of the Ottoman Empire sends tremors through the post-war world. In London and Paris, diplomats breathe a cautious sigh of relief and disappointment. The mapmakers who once expected to carve new colonies across the Middle East must now settle for spheres of influence. The great spoils of the war, Mesopotamian oil, Syrian ports, Arabian trade, remain within Ottoman reach. In Moscow, the newly born Soviet Union reconsiders its southern ambitions. The Bosporus remains guarded by an Ottoman navy under British oversight, closing the door to Russian expansion into the Mediterranean. Instead of hostility, a tense neutrality forms. The empire, once called the sick man of Europe, becomes something else, a patient that refuses to die. Within its borders, the shock of survival transforms politics. The Ottoman elite, chastened by near destruction, finally accepts that modernization is not a Western corruption, but a condition for existence. A new constitution is ratified in 1922, a document written not in imperial language, but in cautious pragmatism. The caliphate is retained as a spiritual institution, while executive power passes to a prime minister elected by the provincial assemblies. The sultan becomes a ceremonial figure, his portrait hanging beside the flag in every school and courthouse, a symbol of continuity rather than control. The Arab provinces, once restless under Turkish centralism, are granted local parliaments. Damascus elects its first Arab governor in centuries. In Baghdad, Kurdish and Shia representatives share a chamber for the first time. The empire's fragile pluralism, the coexistence of Sunni, Shia, Christian and Jewish communities, becomes not an accident, but official policy. Beyond the empire's borders, the world recalibrates. The French turn their eyes to North Africa. The British maintain influence through finance, not force. In a subtle irony, the Ottoman lira stabilizes under British economic guidance, and Istanbul becomes the banking heart of the Eastern Mediterranean. The railways rebuilt by German engineers during the war now form the arteries of a new age. A steel network runs from Izmir to Basra, connecting ports, deserts, and cities. Trade resumes, and with it, a cautious optimism. The Ottoman navy, though small, patrols the Red Sea and Eastern Mediterranean, ensuring that piracy, smuggling, and unrest remain limited. The empire's survival creates a buffer of stability that Europe had long taken for granted, a balance between East and West, tradition and change. The first decade after the Great War does not bring peace, but it prevents catastrophe. And in history, that is often the greater victory. The Middle East, for the first time in a generation, breathes, not freely, but without fear. By the 1930s, the Ottoman Empire that survives is not the same empire that once ruled through divine right. It is smaller, humbler, and far more complex, a living organism learning how to coexist with its own diversity. Ankara becomes the empire's administrative capital, while Istanbul retains its status as the cultural heart of the Islamic world. The streets hum with a mix of languages, Turkish in the courts, Arabic in the markets, Kurdish in the mountains, Armenian and Greek in the ports. What might have been fragmentation instead becomes an identity. Ottoman, no longer a race, but a citizenship. In this timeline, the empire invests heavily in education. Western tutors teach alongside Ottoman scholars. Women enter universities for the first time. A generation of young reformers rises in Aleppo, Cairo, and Baghdad, armed not with rifles, but with books. The empire's Ministry of Knowledge, formed in 1934, introduces a revolutionary idea: compulsory education in both Arabic and Turkish, fostering bilingual citizens of the Federation. Religion, once a matter of state, becomes a matter of conscience. The Caliph, still residing in Istanbul, speaks rarely but powerfully. His sermons, broadcast by radio, emphasize unity and moral balance. Let no man claim superiority over another, except through justice. His words echo across mosques from Tripoli to Mosul, not as decrees, but as reminders. The arts flourish under this new moral calm. Ottoman architecture merges classical domes with modern lines. Poets of Damascus write in both Arabic and French. Painters of Izmir combine Islamic geometry with impressionist color. Istanbul's theaters host translations of Shakespeare beside recitations of Rumi. Most remarkably, Jerusalem, the empire's eternal province, becomes an international city. Under Ottoman stewardship, Jews, Christians, and Muslims live within distinct quarters, but under a single civil law. The Holy City becomes not a battlefield, but a meeting point. Scholars from Europe call it the Vienna of the East. Pilgrims walk its narrow streets under the same crescent banners that had flown there for centuries. Only now they symbolize coexistence rather than conquest. The empire's internal reforms radiate outward. Across Africa and South Asia, colonies under European rule begin to dream of federation rather than revolt. The Ottoman model, flawed but functioning, becomes proof that Islam and modernity need not be enemies. From the ruins of imperial pride, a cultural renaissance is born.
And for a fleeting moment, the Middle East becomes not a story of division, but a song of harmony.
By the dawn of the 21st century, the world that emerges from this surviving Ottoman Empire is both familiar and unrecognizable. The empire no longer stretches from Hungary to Yemen, yet its influence remains woven into the fabric of global politics. What it lacks in territory, it compensates with stability, something the real Middle East never truly achieved. The Ottoman Federation, as it is now officially known, consists of 6 core provinces: Anatolia, Syria, Mesopotamia, Palestine, Lebanon, and Arabia. Each governs itself through local assemblies, but sends delegates to the Imperial Council in Ankara, a hybrid parliament that meets beneath a vast dome of glass and marble. The Sultan's descendant serves as custodian of the Caliphate, a symbolic figure whose weekly address is broadcast across the empire, a soft voice that reminds but does not command. Economically, the empire becomes a bridge, literally and figuratively, between East and West. Istanbul, once the crossroad of caravans, now hums with the noise of cargo trains and fiber-optic cables. Turkish engineers pioneer renewable energy drawn from the winds of the Aegean. Iraqi refineries, rebuilt under federal standards, supply oil not for foreign empires, but for the Federation's own industries. There is no Sykes-Picot border, no line where Syria ends and Iraq begins. Instead, highways and rail networks tie Damascus to Basra, Mosul to Aleppo. The deserts bloom with solar fields. The rivers are tamed by carefully planned dams. A century after the Great War, the Middle East stands not as a bleeding scar, but as an artery of the modern world. Jerusalem remains the empire's neutral capital, a place where embassies of rival nations sit on the same boulevard, where Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are all days of rest. Peace in this timeline is not a dream, it is a habit. Internationally, the Ottoman Federation aligns neither with NATO nor with any single bloc. During the Cold War, it serves as mediator between East and West, a nation trusted by both Washington and Moscow, precisely because it belongs fully to neither. Its diplomats host summits in Istanbul that rival Geneva in importance. By the late 20th century, the empire's universities rank among the world's finest. Baghdad Technical Institute becomes the MIT of the East. Women comprise half of university graduates. Arabic and Turkish remain official languages, but English is widely taught. Religion is omnipresent yet unweaponized, an undercurrent of culture rather than a political force. The arts, once local, become global. Ottoman cinema, a fusion of Persian storytelling and Western framing, sweeps international festivals. Musicians mix oud with violin. Poets translate Rumi for the digital age. A century of uninterrupted stability allows beauty to grow where, in another world, bombs might have fallen. And yet, beneath this surface of order, fractures remain. Kurdish provinces demand greater cultural autonomy. Secularists argue that the caliphate, though symbolic, still shadows politics. In Saudi Arabia, the holy city's governors chafe under federal oversight. These tensions simmer, but they do not erupt. The empire's bureaucracy, refined by 100 years of compromise, manages dissent not through force, but through exhaustion. Every grievance is heard, debated, absorbed, and delayed until it fades. In this alternate 2025, the Middle East is neither a paradise nor a prison. It is a living negotiation, a civilization that bends but does not break. From space, the lights of its cities form a golden crescent stretching from Istanbul to Aden, a silent reminder that one empire chose reason over ruin. History, even when rewritten, rarely offers perfection. The survival of the Ottoman Empire brings balance, not utopia. It spares the Middle East from the violent century that followed its collapse, but it cannot erase the human condition, ambition, pride, and the eternal struggle between faith and freedom. In this alternate timeline, the empire learns the hardest truth of all, that peace is not a gift, but a discipline. The Ottomans, once masters of conquest, become administrators of coexistence. Their empire thrives not through expansion, but through endurance, through the quiet art of keeping contradictions alive without letting them explode. The Western world regards this survival with mixed feelings. Some call it a miracle of pragmatism, others, a relic that delayed the inevitable. Yet as Europe staggers through 2 world wars and a Cold War of its own, the Ottoman Federation stands as a strange mirror, proof that empires need not vanish to modernize, that civilization can evolve without annihilation. The moral of this timeline is neither romantic nor nostalgic. It does not claim that an unbroken Ottoman rule would have created heaven on earth. It suggests something smaller, yet more profound, that continuity can sometimes prevent catastrophe. In our world, the empire's fall unleashed a century of artificial nations and endless proxy wars. In this one, its survival offers the Middle East a chance, not at perfection, but at patience. It is easy to think of peace as the opposite of conflict, yet history shows otherwise. Peace, in its truest form, is the balance between competing truths, the recognition that harmony is built not by victory, but by restraint. The Ottoman story, real or imagined, reminds us that endurance can be revolutionary. Empires fall, but ideas of unity, justice, and mercy endure far longer than borders. Perhaps the Middle East, in any world, can never be without tension. But in this one, at least, it learns to live with it. And in doing so, it learns to live at all. History is not a straight road. It is a labyrinth of choices. One decision made differently, one treaty signed a year earlier, and the world's center might have shifted forever. In our reality, the Ottoman Empire vanished, and the Middle East fractured under the weight of maps drawn by others. But in another, quieter timeline, it endured, adapting, negotiating, surviving. Would that world be more peaceful? Perhaps not entirely, but perhaps it would understand peace better, as something earned, not imposed. History didn't end when the empire fell. It simply went elsewhere. And somewhere, in that elsewhere, the crescent still rises over calm seas, its reflection trembling on the water, a symbol of what might have been and what still could be.